There was my 1.5 second break. And now we'll get to the regulations. Regulations are adopted by specified government agencies that are given specific authority and direction. In other words, in the law, as a law is written and adopted, or an ordinance is written and adopted, part of the language of that law would be which agency is given authority over this, regulatory control over this. And they're also given some direction in terms of what they're required to do to make sure that this law is implemented and enforced. Regulatory agencies are created by law and authorized to develop regulations. I already told you about the USDA, that there is a federal law that says the USDA must exist as a responsibility of the federal government. And so too the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, or the CDC, which I think you've heard a lot about, the Center for Disease Control. Lots of agencies, they exist because there's a law that says they must exist, not only at the federal level, but state and sometimes city and county levels as well. And part of the collection of laws that not only say they must exist in order to provide some service, but what are their responsibilities? And those responsibilities can be added to over time. Regulations put laws into action by supplying the details of compliance and of enforcement. So, as I mentioned before, how do you make sure that people are food safe? How do you make sure that people are being safe on the road? There, speed limits and no left turns on red lights, and all kinds of different rules that we have, whether it's driving, whether it's food safety, whether it's contract law, whether it's intellectual property rights. I can't go out and make my own line of Nike shoes. Nike owns that brand. There's a law in terms of trademark that I can't violate. So, one of the challenges that as new laws are being made, often just they're dumped onto existing agencies for regulatory purposes. And so the USDA keeps getting more and more stuff dumped on it. But often the money doesn't follow. It's like, all right, you got to do this too. Oh, and this, and here's 5 more things. And well, don't forget these 10. And they keep adding more and more and more without the resources, without additional people and money to come up with the regulations, to enact proper programs so the regulations are being followed, and enforcement. So in some cases, there are laws with no reason to follow them because nobody's looking. And that's not good. And we've got to be careful about that. If you're going to have a law, you need to have a law that can be followed, regulated, and enforced. Otherwise, it's kind of just political posturing to say, look what I did. And in reality, you did nothing but paper that nobody's paying attention to. But still, regulations are huge. They are important. 2 most commonly encountered collections of law are federal and state. The city and county things are fine-tuning details, maybe where can I build this new warehouse, things like that. There might be certain specific laws, but you deal with them once in a while, but you don't deal with the local stuff nearly as often as the federal and state. That's the big stuff. That's what you have to deal with on a regular basis. At the federal level, there are 50 titles in the United States Code. So it's organized like an outline. There's the United States Code, the code book of laws of the United States. And there are 50 titles, 50 groups. And then within each of those 50 groups, there are specific sections, and it goes down into detail like an outline with all of the wording and the detail once you get to a specific law. In California, it's organized very similarly with 29 titles and huge range of rules, some of which are obviously agriculture, some of which apply to agriculture but are not quite as obvious. And so here, for example, is the 50 titles of the US Code. And one that I see, or one whole section, railroads, shipping and transportation, 45, 46, and 49 here. Are those about agriculture? Not directly, but do they affect agriculture? Oh, hell, they're all about moving product around. It doesn't matter whether it's agriculture or anything else. But these codes, these titles within the codes are huge. Patents, I would say the same thing. Is that about ag? No. Does it affect ag? Is ag part of that? Hell yes. So a lot of these affect agriculture. And one that I think is pretty obvious that impacts agriculture pretty heavily is number 7, agriculture. You don't have to be too bright to understand that Title 7 is going to be really important in agriculture. Labor, again, I'm not going to go down the list. You don't need to memorize this list at all. You just need to understand that there are 50 titles within the codes of the US, many of which are directly or indirectly impacting agriculture. And if I wanted to learn more about these, I could certainly follow the link, and here's the Cornell Legal Information Institute. Cornell University in New York has all of the updated codes available. And here are the titles in the California codes. And I'm just making sure that that link works, and I'm sure it would. And there it is, California Legislative Information. So all the different sections here. Now, is it 29? Or, if there's one added, one taken away, 2 combined, I'm not going to get into that kind of detail. I'm pretty sure there's still 29. But if there's not, I'm not going to go and count them. I will never ask you how many are there. But again, labor code, very important in agriculture. The education code, that is something I have to deal with all of the time in my job. Food and agriculture, obviously agriculture. So again, lots of things. Water code, oh my God, is that agriculture, among other things. So regulations are the implementing rules for laws and are recorded in the federal and state codes of regulation. So your laws are called the codes. So I got my federal codes. But I also have my federal codes of regulation, and it's organized exactly the same way, in exactly the same titles and sections and everything else. It's all organized. The outline is exactly identical. But when you drill down on the law, on the codes, you get to the wording of the law. You drill down to the exact same organizational hierarchy, the same section, and you can read about the regulations. So here are the federal codes of regulations. Again, exactly the same stuff, exactly the same list, with number 7 being agriculture. The only difference is when you were to drill down into this, instead of reading the language of the law that the legislature or the Congress put together, you're now reading the compliance part. You're reading the rules of compliance, the regulations, and enforcement. Compliance and enforcement go hand in hand. And the same thing, the codes of regulations for California. And this has 28, the other one had 29. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So Title III, Food and Agriculture at the California state level. This is really important. So the list in the order that it was on that slide isn't important. They get these names, these titles that we talk about and that are important in communication. So for example, education is Title V. So I talk about Title V with my colleagues all the time about what's going on with Title V education. Within the agriculture, it's divided up into a division. So I've got a code of regulation, a title, and now I've got a division, which is a section of that. And this particular first division is about administration issues. So chapter 1 is general food and agriculture administration issues, the Department of Food and Agriculture, Department of Pesticide Regulations, examination for county officers, et cetera, et cetera. Again, don't memorize this stuff. It's just how it's organized. Codes, codes of regulations, titles, divisions, chapters. And within the chapters, the organization is going to be further subdivided into the specific details. Animal industry is division 2, so dairies and poultry, etc. Economics, plants, and miscellaneous. So I'm not going to go through the details on this anymore. Lots of other regulatory things that will come up in the federal and state codes that may be directly or indirectly affecting agriculture. And it's important to know what these rules are, regulations to comply. With production agriculture and production of lettuce and strawberries and broccoli and all the stuff we're growing here in Monterey County, is affected by the Monterey County codes. Cities may adopt other specific laws for agriculture, and the Monterey County Code Book is actually full of ordinances. Don't worry about that. We generally call them ordinances, but as a collection, we call the Code Book or the Monterey County Codes or Codes of Ordinances. And so here are the titles of the Monterey County Codes, the collection of laws, the collection of ordinances. So this is the codes of ordinances. Okay, so the individual law, the individual code is called an ordinance, but still the word codes is part of the language. Okay, so keep that straight. Federal codes, state codes, county ordinances, city ordinances. And we get to things that sometimes are very important at the local level, streets and sidewalks, zoning. Zoning is where you can build what kinds of things. You can't put a tire factory in the middle of a residential neighborhood. You need to be in an industrial part of the county in order to build a tire manufacturing facility. Or even an agricultural packing house. You've got to be in a place that is zoned to allow that kind of business operation. And likewise, I can't build an apartment complex right in the middle of an industrial area unless it is somehow a mixed residential light industrial area, which some places are, where you have these mixed communities. But even in a mixed zone, you're not going to have a tire manufacturing facility and residences right next to each other. Doesn't make a lot of sense. There are a lot of issues. These kind of are constant. Labor's been ramping up for 20 years and is an issue, will remain an issue. Safety, worker safety, primarily they're talking about here, food safety, pesticide use, which is kind of an offshoot of safety. not only to workers, but to the public, to the environment. Vehicle codes, habitat and species, so issues dealing with our interaction or interface between agriculture and the environment. Water is always an issue. This isn't something that's new. This is something that's been going on for generations, not just decades. Air quality, land use, building and health. These are things that I would say are current, but they have been. This has been the same basic list with minor changes in priority, minor changes in some of the specifics for 20 years. These issues haven't changed a whole lot. So we're going to get into the history, the key timeline of laws and regulations. And I don't know if this is still active, but I'm going to take a look. There are some great historical records, agricultural history. I don't know if this has all the same information, but it still is there under the National Ag Library, which is awesome. Glad it's still there and not moved. And also with the USDA, they have some great historical information that went into this and USDA history. Perfect. They're both still active sites. So again, I'm going to take a short break, chop these lectures up into smaller pieces,